is December 11th, 2024, and while the world is on fire, you've got Israel continuing to massacre dozens of Palestinians on a daily basis. You've got the fallout from the overthrow of Assad in Syria just getting started, while you also have the US doing its part to bring us closer to World War III against Russia by signing off on the transfer of just $20 billion in a new loan for Ukraine backed by stolen Russian assets. All of this as you also have the US now warning that Russia is getting closer and closer any day now. They could be launching an attack involving their brand new intermediate range ballistic missile called the Oreshnik, or Hazel in English. The US is now warning about this as if this is something that we should be concerned about when the US literally just lifted restrictions on Kiev's use of long-range weapons on Russian territory, which we know means Washington's use of those weapons on Russian territory. Russia has given warning after warning, and it's like the US still cannot figure out how in the world we got to this point, or at least that's what they want you to think. So we're going to be getting into all of the latest updates today, but first, just a quick reminder to make sure that you are subscribed to my channel wherever you are watching this video, and also if you're watching it on YouTube, please make sure that you're subscribed to an alternative. I know that my YouTube channel just hit 75,000 subscribers this week. I am so incredibly grateful to each and every one of you. But just a quick reminder to make sure that you're also signed up on an alternative platform, that you're subscribed to my channel there. I am on Rumble. I know that Rumble is a big alternative, so you can search Rachel Blevins there, find my channel. Make sure that you give it a subscribe because it is struggling with the numbers over there on Rumble. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where every time I post a new video, you will get it sent right to your inbox. You can make sure that you never miss a new video. And if you sign up as a paid subscriber, you also get access to exclusive content like my weekly exclusive deep dive series for paid subscribers called Sanctions. So just a note there, thank you so much for 75,000 subscribers over on YouTube. And as always, check out those alternatives because every time we hit another milestone for YouTube, I always get really concerned that they're going to start paying attention to my channel and the topics that I cover. All right, now back to today's video. It came with very little media attention this week as the US Treasury Department confirmed on Tuesday that it transferred the $20 billion of the US portion of a $50 billion G7 loan for Ukraine to the World Bank for economic and financial aid to Kiev. Of course, the EU is coming up with the bulk of this because they hold the bulk of the $300 billion worth of Russian assets that the West decided to freeze because of the war in Ukraine. Really, it was something that they used that excuse to get away with freezing all of those assets and really setting an incredibly dangerous precedent along the way. But can we just take a minute to talk about how absurd this is? I mean, you have one country that's at war with another country, and then you have a whole bunch of other countries that are aiding one side, acting as if they're not directly at war with the other side. Oh, and now they're coming in, stealing $300 billion, and then saying that they are going to take the profit from that money and that they are going to use that to help the side that they are aiding in order to continue fighting the other side. It's just insane. And I know that I'm going to get comments from people that say, oh, well, it's just the profits that Russia would have made off of these frozen assets. It's not the actual assets themselves. But if you think about it, okay, so they froze $300 billion. They're taking a loan, they're servicing it with what they say is the interest that is going to be made off of that money. So a $50 billion loan over the next 30 years. So what that tells me is that the West is not planning on unfreezing these assets anytime soon. They're telling us that they plan to keep these assets frozen for at least the next 30 years, which who's to say that they're not going to cut into it and just keep taking more and more of the money? They have no incentive to unfreeze that money because then they've got to come up with the collateral to then back that $50 billion loan for Kiev. it's sending a very clear message to Russia. No matter what does happen in the years to come, you have Europe and the US now in this position where they're looking at the situation and going, we can't unfreeze that money, or else then we're going to have to figure out how to get the money for this loan. It's just setting us up for more and more conflict, no matter what does end up happening in Ukraine. So, in other words, the West just stole $300 billion from Russia. I mean, let's call it what it is. But on a less serious note here, can we also just mention the New York Times report on this current situation? As serious as it is, as dangerous as the precedent is, you have the New York Times with this report in which they say that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen gathered members of her staff in her large conference room, and officials watched as the $20 billion transfer was executed on a laptop from the Treasury Department to the World Bank. I mean, can you imagine for a second if they got the wrong address? Like, who is sending $20 billion wire transfers? Maybe that's not exactly how it happened. Maybe it's just as it's being reported. But still, this is insane. I swear we do not live in real life sometimes. But anyways, moving on to some of the more serious issues that we're currently dealing with, because right now we have the Biden administration making us all feel like they are doing everything in their power to march the US to World War III against Russia as much as they possibly can, as close as they can get before their term in office comes to an end. And then we have the incoming Trump administration trying to figure out how they are going to handle Ukraine starting next month. And notably, incoming President Trump met with French President Emmanuel Macron and Ukrainian leader Zelensky this week. And I mean, what a trio, right? You look at these three individuals, you've got one of them, Trump, who literally campaigned so heavily on ending the war in Ukraine, said he could do it in 24 hours, said he could do it as president-elect before he had even stepped into the White House. He's definitely going to have that pressure on him once he does get into the White House. And then you have him meeting there with Macron, who really supports the war in Ukraine. I would say that that's an understatement. So much so that he has even talked about the possibility of NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. And in fact, doubled down on it, saying that this is a reality that the alliance is going to have to come to grips with at some point. And then, of course, you have Zelensky, who's just trying to hold on to his job at the moment and trying to navigate the waters from Biden, who wants to give him World War III in a handbasket, to Trump, who is claiming that he wants to see peace in Ukraine. So what was said behind closed doors? Well, according to the anonymous sources who spoke to Reuters, the three leaders who talked for 35 minutes without advisors did not discuss specific details of any vision for peace, but Trump repeated that he wanted an immediate ceasefire and negotiations to end the war quickly. Now, the report did also mention that Zelensky is incredibly concerned right now, that he's looking at the situation in the Donbass. He's seeing significant advances from Russian forces and realizing that there's not much that Kiev's forces can do on their end. Yes, even with firing long-range strikes into Russian territory, that's not changing the situation on the front lines in the Donbass. So he's realizing, surely Zelensky has to be realizing, that all of his calls for the territory, whether that be Crimea, whether that be the republics in the Donbass that voluntarily chose to leave Ukraine in the aftermath of the US-backed coup in Kiev. They decided that they wanted nothing to do with this new Western-backed leadership, that there's a good chance, a very probable chance, that those territories are not going to be forced back under Zelensky's control, and that he's going to have to come to terms with the fact that if there is any sort of agreement with Russia, he's not going to like it. And I mean, that's on him at the end of the day. This man has spent the last 3 years acting as if he is on the winning side, as if Russia is gravely losing here, and you have Ukraine trying to dictate these terms, whether it be for his so-called peace plan, his so-called victory plan. It's like every single one of those plans is so condescending to Russia because it treats Russia as if they are the losing party. Now, we know that according to the reports that we've seen from these anonymous, sort of Trump adjacent insiders, they all claim that Trump is going to propose some sort of frozen conflict to say, hey, let's freeze things where they are on the battlefield for the next 20 years. Kiev will commit to not joining NATO. At the same time, that will give the West the option to rearm Kiev. But when I look at that, I go, why would Russia agree to any of this, right? They're clearly winning on the battlefield. They're making significant advances in the Donbass. They know that they have the manpower, not including these alleged North Korean troops that the West has tried to throw in there and then magically forgotten about in recent weeks. But Russia knows that they have the manpower where Kiev does not, right? Where Kiev is facing significant manpower shortages. So why would Russia agree to a frozen conflict? It just does not make sense for them from everything that I've seen. And one of the things that Russia needs to be paying attention to, I'm hoping that they are, right, is what we just went through in Syria over the last 2 weeks. Because back in 2020, Russia and Turkey agreed to a ceasefire deal, which froze the conflict in northwestern Syria. Part of that was that the Assad government there had to agree that they would not touch Al Qaeda in Idlib. So Al Qaeda was allowed to reign in Idlib to build up their forces there with the help of Turkey and whoever else was involved, looking at the US and Israel, likely. Okay, so they were able to build up their forces in Idlib. Well, even though you had this frozen conflict of sorts for the last 4 years, as we've learned in the last 2 weeks, it can become unfrozen extremely quickly, which is exactly what we've seen happen. So Russia should be paying attention to that and going, okay, even if there was a small chance of them even considering a frozen conflict in Ukraine, that is not what would be best for them. That would just be bringing us back to the time of the Minsk Accords, where you had the West claiming one thing while openly continuing to arm Kiev for another future conflict with Russia. So if Russia doesn't want a future conflict with the same Kiev regime, if they don't want to have to deal with this and go through this over again, then they have got to be looking at the current situation and knowing that this is not in their best interest. And I do think that they are aware of that, right? I think that they know that, given the fact that we've had at least these reports from Russian President Putin's recent phone call with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, in which he was reported to have said, look, when it comes to Russia's demands for talks, they are out there, right? We've made it very clear exactly where we stand. Everything has been public and transparent. It's up to the West now to see this and to come to terms with the reality that we are all living in here. And speaking of the latest gains on Russia's end in the Donbass, we literally have reports here from the Western media, right, from Reuters, admitting that Russian forces captured several Ukrainian positions near the eastern city of Pokrovsk. That's according to Kiev's military. That's what they admitted on Wednesday. And after months of accelerating advances towards Pokrovsk, Moscow's forces are now as close as 3 kilometers or 1.9 miles from the southern outskirts of the city. And we have to remember that Pokrovsk is incredibly important for Kiev. It is a strategic hub. It is key to their supply lines. If they lose this, that puts them at an extreme disadvantage in the region, and it calls their entire future occupation of the region into question. So a lot at stake here. The fact that we're seeing these Russian advances the way that we are, it just brings me back to the question of why would Russia agree to anything less, right? When they're right there, when they're making these advances, why would they back down? I certainly don't see Putin backing down just because Donald Trump is in office now and Trump is talking about how he wants peace. No, he knows that at the end of the day, Trump is only there for 4 years. And what comes after him, we have no idea what that's going to look like or what it's going to mean for future U.S. support for the regime in Kiev. All right, so we have that news there. We also have Zelensky commenting not on these latest gains by Russia, but on what he claims are the number of casualties that Ukraine has suffered. According to Zelensky, Ukraine has only had 43,000 troops killed by Russia in 3 years. That's after he gave the figure of 31,000 troops killed back in February, and even then it was significantly less than Washington's own estimate, which is a hell of a lot less than Russia's estimate. In fact, according to the Russian Defense Ministry, Kiev's army has lost nearly 40,000 troops in the last 4 months alone. And it is important to note that there's a difference between their estimated losses, right? Losses just means that the individual troops are out of combat, right? They could be killed, they could be injured. That's what they are talking about. Zelensky is talking about troops killed. But still, you see the disparity here in Zelensky's just ridiculous claims and what Russia is saying on its end, what the US is saying. Oh, and also what the mainstream media is saying. Because you had The Economist just last month saying that Kiev's losses had surpassed 500,000 troops. I'm just saying, if you had more than 500,000 troops that are now out of combat, it is extremely illogical to think that only 43,000 of those troops were killed. The number has got to be much, much higher. And do you know how we know that it's much, much higher? Oh, well, because the Biden administration is currently trying to convince Ukraine to include 18-year-olds in its forced conscription efforts. As Secretary of State Antony Blinken told reporters that, quote, even with the money, even with the munitions, there have to be people on the front lines to deal with the Russian aggression. And I don't think it gets much clearer than that. Even the US right now is admitting that Kiev has a significant manpower problem and that they are going to have to figure out how to do that. Now, the US is, of course, putting the pressure on Kiev, saying, you need to force more and more men to come back home to Ukraine to fight in this war. You need to force 18-year-olds into the war. That is their answer for now. But when that doesn't work, then what's going to happen? Are they going to turn to NATO boots on the ground? Because that's the thing. So many in the public here in the West, they're fine with sending billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine to pay for more and more war. They're fine in saying that they support what is effectively a proxy war against Russia. But when it comes down to those individual members of NATO, right? The individual voters, to them and their loved ones being the ones who are forced to go to war and fight, that makes it a very different situation altogether. And as we enter this new era where you have the US and other Western countries allowing Kiev, participating with Kiev in launching long-range strikes on Russian territory, and then you have Russia on its own saying, okay, we're going to roll out this brand new Oreshnik missile and we are going to use it against you. And then you have the West freaking out and acting as if, how dare they? It is more important than ever to remember that we did not get to this point overnight, right? This has been a slow buildup. This has been just countless warnings from Russia calling on the West to pull back, calling on them not to let us get directly to World War III, noting that Russia sees these attacks from Kiev and from the West as directly from the West. The warnings have been there. The West has refused to listen and has continued to escalate to a point where we are now looking at the point of no return. And that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive deep dive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.